Adelaide's an interesting place. It's been probably the property market and the development market has probably propped the initial sort of conversation around development, which has always led to this sort of really poorly planned residential outcome with, the bonus al fresco and the bonus living area and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's sort of set a bit of a precedent in people's mind that that's the epitome of high-end property in Adelaide.
The Art of Living, a podcast for Brickworks building products. Presented by Tim Ross.
Australia is currently going through a design boom when it comes to residential architecture. In this new podcast series, I talk to some of the country's best architects to find out how our views on what and where we build has changed. What do we need and want from our houses today? And ultimately, I ask the question, what makes a house a home?
Hello, Ben speaking.
G'day, mate. Tim Ross.
Tim, how you going?
Pretty good. G'day, yes, I am Tim Ross, and welcome to The Art of Living. It's great to have you along for the ride with this episode, which is all about Adelaide, a city which has a great deal going for it, as you're about to hear. My guest today is Benjamin Edwards, a director of Ply Architecture, a firm that's made their mark with some of Adelaide's best residential architecture. He's passionate about his hometown, and to kick things off, I asked him what a house in Adelaide is like and what do people want from a home in Adelaide.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I guess we've got such a diverse, vernacular across many different areas. So we sort of, it's really hard to, pin down one particular style that we see. We've got a very desirable sort of Victorian heritage composition that happens through the suburbs. There's sort of particular suburbs that are key and full of those, quite opulent dwellings. And then we've got a really nice fine grain of, pre-war cottages, post-war cottages. We've got some beautiful modernist stuff. We've got some really interesting coastal cross Californian bungalow kind of configurations as well. So, any project is always a little bit different. We don't really get, we've never sort of really working on one similar style of dwelling, and particularly that then flows on to the work that we do as well. There's never really one right response to that. We're always testing and trying new things in different orientations. Adelaide's marvellous. It's got this sort of really rigid grid as part of the city and suburban structures that allows us to basically work with typically a 10 to 15 metre frontage, 45 to 60 metre in depth. Normally the dwelling's set quite far forward, so we're doing a lot of alteration projects where there's a lot of space to work out the back, which is great. And sort of the grid works typically in most suburban areas as a north-south orientation. So unfortunately, the ones where the backyard is facing south, that takes a little bit more hard work to work those in and get that natural light in and things like that. But there's a lot of variety in Adelaide. There's not really one or two different styles. Everything's different.
I mean, you've traditionally been blessed with, good sized blocks, reasonably affordable housing from a national point of view. How's that changed over the last couple of years?
Particularly this year and probably at the start of COVID, our property market, which has been a relatively sleepy little industry, has accelerated dramatically, and we're particularly seeing whether it's an influx of people from the eastern seaboards or just a general hysteria with the property market. We're seeing the value of a standard typical domestic dwelling throughout pretty much any suburb in the CBD ring. It's around probably 15 to 20% in inflation now. And that, I think what that's sort of done for us, particularly as residential architects, has left or enforced some confidence in people to I guess, start the process of either retaining their existing dwelling, adding on to it, reconfiguring it, and so on. So, it's been a blessing in the sense of the property market's growing relatively exponential now, and that's absolutely giving people a lot of confidence to
not
sit back.
Not so great if you're trying to get into the market, though.
Absolutely not. No. It's I feel sorry for the next or the generation in or behind me, I should say, that are looking at trying to purchase our typically what was a relatively low socioeconomic demographic through central or the western sort of inner ring of Adelaide. Houses have just gone ludicrous through there, and they're great places. They're big blocks, beautiful heritage dwellings, with the standard little lean-to with the toilet in them, and the standard brief for us now is let's chop off the lean-to, amenities in the threshold, and then let's go crazy with it. Kitchen, living, dining arrangement into pool, whatever. So,
what are those houses that say how close are they to the city? I mean, most houses tend to be closer to the city than people realise in other states. But how close are they to the Adelaide CBD?
Well, we're very fortunate in our footprint in Adelaide. We've got the foothills are within 15 minutes of the CBD. The coast is within 15 minutes in the other direction, and we've kind of then got this sort of lateral sprawl that happens in a north-south direction. Again, most of the population is in that ring within reason, and we're literally talking. We can get from the coast to the foothills within 30 to 40 minutes at absolute max. Fortunately, traffic is relatively low density at the moment in Adelaide, and I think it's been like that for quite a while. And we don't have that sort of really tricky crossover and I guess the sort of topography that maybe Sydney or Melbourne has, where you've got a sort of circulated bay of some description. So, we're quite fortunate in that respect.
So it's easy to get around, and so you're 15 minutes from the city. You can buy a house for how much?
Oh, for at the moment, I reckon things are sort of through the inner west are hitting the 800 to 900 mark, and that's for probably something that hasn't been looked at for 60 plus years. As you move sort of outwards towards the coast, it probably grows exponentially, but still we're nowhere near probably the most or the highest sort of gained price for a sale on the coast, maybe around the sort of 2.5 million mark. We're still sort of, I guess, adapting to the growth at the moment, but we've got this really interesting topography that the further you go south in sort of CBD setting, you're actually going up in a lot of elevation as well. So we've kind of got this Hollywood Hills type arrangement up in Seacliff Park and Seacombe Gardens and areas like that, where the views are northwest, which for us is superb from a natural lighting quality. You're just getting to shut out that really harsh summer sun, and you're getting a panoramic view from Mount Lofty, which is our tallest mountain or tallest peak, across to Merino, which is settled on the coast. So there's some great opportunities up there, and that's still finding its roots. It's not crazy money, but it's getting up there. I think one sold a sort of a fibro sort of dwelling, maybe 3 bedrooms, sold for 1.3 million, I think, yesterday, which is actually just up the road from my house.
So it's getting up there, but it's still affordable by, I suppose, the Eastern Seaboard point of view in lots of ways. So when people are coming to you today and they're either renovations or new builds, what's important to people in Adelaide? What do people want from their home today?
That's changed a bit over the duration that we've been in practice. I think probably around 10 years ago, it was all about it was a conservative approach. People were really, really worried about this sort of idea of overcapitalisation. What sort of happened through the journey of probably the last sort of 2 or 3 years is that's changed, and people are now appreciating the value of working particularly with an architect, I think is been really important as well. But people are wanting, they're wanting that sort of intimacy, but they still want to be able to entertain. So the plans are becoming quite diverse. We're sort of lost that idea of the mega mansion open plan, 12 by 12 open plan living. It's never really worked, and it doesn't, it's never been an intimacy thing. Whereas now people are wanting the same sort of, I guess, engagement, but they're wanting to be able to sort of segregate themselves, and whether that's a result of potentially spending more time at home and cross-pollinating with other family members or not. But we're definitely seeing people wanting to sort of carve up that sort of desire of big into much more sort of smaller, malleable spaces that then have connection and ability to open out and create one big space. And the idea of sort of inside and outside has become paramount, I think, in a lot of our projects.
So people still want a lot of space, but they want to use it in different ways, or they want some separation, and they want to obviously make the most of the outdoors.
Yeah, that's right. I think the idea of still having that big sort of kitchen, living, dining arrangement for the idea or the concept of entertaining, whether it happens as much as people think it does or not. We often get clients asking us to, we want to be able to design it and have it, adaptable for 80 people, and then you sort of ask them, well, when, how often are you having 80 people in your house? And it's, once or if a year. So, we try and work through and rationalise that with people, and that also obviously crosses over with budget, project budget. That sort of overlay is always a constraining factor to a project in any case. So we normally manage to arrive at a happy medium, and it's typically a fine grained little alteration that captures everything they need, and we borrow light and we borrow space and connect through that.
What do you talk people out of? We
try to talk people out of the idea of al fresco. And the reason for that is what we generally find is, we design these really beautiful kitchen spaces, and then there's a threshold, and then people put an entire another kitchen outside, and then they enclose that, and then they want another area they can go out to, when there's medium sun and it's 35 degrees. And we really try and, I guess, rationalise through those things and go, do you really need all of these spaces? Why don't we invest in, a beautiful big stacker door that can, open your indoor to your outdoor, and that becomes your al fresco or outdoor. We don't use the word al fresco, but we try and sort of emphasise those points. And most of our projects where we sort of are working through that quite early on in the design stage, we find are relatively successful in that delivery. So.
And why do they respond to you pushing back on that?
That's a very interesting question. It normally takes a little bit, and takes a little bit of convincing and sort of, I guess, a little bit of mud mapping to unpack that idea, and often a couple of precedents assist with that. But I think Adelaide's an interesting place. It's been probably the property market and the development market has probably propped the initial sort of conversation around development, which has always led to this sort of really poorly planned residential outcome with, the bonus al fresco and the bonus living area and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's sort of set a bit of a precedent in people's mind that's the epitome of high-end property in Adelaide. So it always is on the brief. It's always something that comes through. And I guess it's just about moulding and explaining those things like I did with, if we open out the kitchen and the living area to a really nicely little landscaped patio, you actually can use that inside area as well as the outside area as one big space. You're not creating another space inside another space. And most people are quite receptive to that and seem to understand it. We always ask the question. Adelaide is very, I guess, transient in its climate. We go from 45 degrees in summer to 9 degrees in winter, and everyone wants this idea that they can go outside when it's absolute hammering with rain and blowing 50 knots. The reality is no one ever does, and the cost of putting a roof over that area and enclosing it, plumbing it, and blah blah blah, adds exponential cost to a project. So as soon as numbers and dollars come into it, we find that generally the conversation finishes there and they're on board. So.
This is The Art of Living. For more fresh and inspiring architectural content, head to the Brickworks website. When you are talking to someone, and I think it's one of the most underrated things about a relationship between an architect and client, is this idea that someone's generally interested in how you want to live. Or what are people saying to you about what they want rather than space, right, about rooms? What do they want from their homes and for how long?
Yeah, it's not something that comes up initially, I guess, in that project brief. It's normally a base level spatial requirement, and that sort of absolute need and want and emotion in the outcome is generally fleshed out through the sort of initial sketch design processes, I guess. We typically find that people particularly now want flexibility and adaptability. They want to be able to use spaces for multiple different uses. And whether, that's probably not really something that's maybe have come out of the COVID situation or the last year, but it's probably been further reinforced as a result of that. So the ability that, a third bedroom can actually, rather than adding a third bedroom and a study, can be both. And then how that threshold is controlled and the relationship to space and that kind of understanding. And I guess that's a lot of our role to present how that works to people. And that's probably one of the things we've found. We've also found people are really wanting, I'll put it as in a childlike terminology, but they want the house to act as a cuddle. And the reason I say that is they want that ability that when the situation globally, locally, political goes pear-shaped, that there is that ability that you can actually recluse into your house and you can actually enjoy the space as well. It's not just a series of walls that enclose you. It's actually providing all those things that you seek to do outside of the home. And we often see the idea of that courtyard and the idea of being able to bring the inside out, and whether that then doubles up as a area for gym or Pilates or whatever through lockdown or just in general. I think that flexibility in the landscape also plays a big part of it. So,
and when you think about the perfect Adelaide home for today, where is it and what does it look like?
The perfect Adelaide home, that's a multifaceted question. I think and I guess a lot of the work that we do is also alteration based, as well as new builds. We do quite a few new build projects as well, but I'll probably more reference alteration projects.
Yeah.
And we typically find that the perfect outcome for us is, or for the client, I should say, is really retaining the heritage or the homage of the existing dwelling and retaining that in full, basically offsetting completely from that back wall into a new reconfigured way of modern living. In an ideal world, it's the backyard is the most northern point on the site. It's drenched in natural light. It's protected from our harsh southwesterly sea breezes, whilst it opens up to these sort of northerlies that come through in the summer, and it responds in that way. And I think what we are seeing a lot of as well is people really wanting to retain the backyard, which is great. We sort of went through this diverse sort of issue 10 years ago where every single big block in these sort of outer fringe suburbs was chopped into 3, 5, 10, 15, and you were left with the absolute minimum private open space. That model is now not as appealing as actually having space and working within a space, and that's sort of led to, I guess, an influx in projects and people retaining that existing dwelling.
What do you think that's changed?
I think it's got a lot to do with the fact that people now appreciate the value of space and the ability to use space. And albeit whilst lockdowns on, you're restricted to your own envelope effectively to some degree. And whilst you can still exercise out and about, that ability to open those back doors and integrate with the backyard and kick the footy with the kids and ride the bike, skateboard, whatever, is invaluable. Whereas I think the development model, it worked to get a density into the city, and I think that density is almost or it's relatively at peak. And now people are sort of steering away from that model. And you see that the developers are now, particularly in Adelaide, are now focusing on, I guess, a reconsideration of the value of space. And rather than, putting 5 on a block, they're looking at to put 2 on a block or 3 on a block and retaining some private open space and areas to, I guess, retreat to.
Which is a good way to get into my next question, which is, these are effects of the time, but obviously people are making these decisions now. I'm going to have more open space. I'm going to have a more flexible spaces within my house, and that will hang around because people have made those design decisions now. Do you think these decisions will hang around for a long period of time?
Absolutely. I think so. I think it's set a precedent for, I guess, a better way of living. And we're now seeing, and that probably goes back to the discussion we had about property value and the value of space and the projects and the dwellings that we're seeing that are selling for excruciating amounts of money in Adelaide aren't by all means sites with opportunities to develop in the sense of multi sites. They're absolutely the big sort of proper 800, 900 square metre allotments, really nice quaint house at the front and the ability to do a really modest extension on the back. And I think that's sort of set a bit of a precedent. And also I think we're over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot more exposure to successful projects through various channels as well. And people are starting to really appreciate design and what can be done with better design. So yeah, I absolutely think it's here for a while. Absolutely.
Housing affordability is going to continue to be a huge issue across the country. Is there a way that architecture and good design can contribute to more affordable housing?
I think they can. It creates a really cohesive team, and that's led by from the developer through to the bill payer. I guess it's a model that's been tried many times, and some have been more successful than others. I think it's a balance of current demand, I guess, expectation of the person or the inhabitant or the occupant, and I guess a deliverable and being smart with that. And I've seen some quite successful models overseas and across the ditch in NZ as well, where there is that ability to deliver really affordable housing outcomes with the integration of architecture and smart design and smart services and all the parts that make a home. I think for us in Adelaide specifically, we're still, I guess, on the fringe of that change. We're starting to see some of the bigger developers invest time into thinking about affordability whilst engaging architects. But yeah, there's a very vast spread in Adelaide still of that sort of development and that idea of house affordability. It's still a bit of an inverted commas process, particularly when people who are looking at buying investments or whatever, and then they're sort of running through all these government schemes and somehow it's affordable from a marketing perspective, but everyone knows it's still not an affordable outcome.
What are some of the projects that you think have successfully given a fabulous outcome to the homeowners to your clients and contributed to them having a better life?
We've done a big variety of projects at Ply. We've predominantly done or completed new builds and alteration projects, and probably some of the sort of most successful ones are the ones that have, I guess, we approach our design projects as very much a client-led engagement, and we sort of, I guess, the idea of capturing project brief and recording it and understanding the nuances I guess the idiosyncrasies of a client is really important to that initial stages. And I think as a result of that, we've sort of done a whole range of different outcomes, and albeit they look completely different across the board, and that's generally influenced by the client in some capacity. But probably for me personally, we've done some alteration projects where we've sort of gone back to do the photography shoot, and the clients are just, they're raving about the ability to sit in this space and be warm, and the ability to see the garden and watch their children in the other room and things like that. And it's all these, I guess, these ideas that we penciled down and may have not exactly explained them to them that was that was the idea behind it, but I guess let them sort of passively unpack the place. And particularly a project we worked on in Colonel Light Gardens, which is a really interesting little pocket in South Australia. It's all state heritage listed. It's a garden model city concept, and all the dwellings are of these sort of beautiful proportions. I think there's 13 or 14 different house typologies that were rolled out, and we did this alteration on the back of one of them that sort of interfaced with a corner, and it was quite a dynamic sort of C-shaped addition, and it goes by the acronym NTH, which sort of responded to the site, the client, and a few of the outcomes of that project. And that was one of those ones that we sort of went back into, and the clients were dancing around and telling us that it was a really successful outcome for them in the way they lived and the way they used the site and how they wanted the site to be used. So,
I mean, it has a big part to do with your work and how you design in Adelaide. I mean, this is probably a more personal question in some ways as well, because it's hard to answer this question without looking at the way that you live. But for you, Benjamin, what makes a house a home?
The idea of a house, I guess I would answer the question personally is what makes a house initially. And I think that's obviously the arrangement of space and the way that, as a family or a contingent, you interact, and you can recluse and you can, I guess, be private in some capacity. And then I guess the layering of home onto that is probably a personal approach to that. And I guess it's a multifaceted question as to what makes a house a home. But I guess it's a home is a measure of potentially oneself, and the way that they have the ability that when they go through that front facade or back facade, or however you enter the house, that you can sort of, I guess, turn off or turn on, or however you want to sort of arrange it. And I think that's one of the main things that we look at, that the idea of house and home are relatively cohesive. I guess house is a typology that's given to that particular building, whereas a home is the emotion, is the intimacy, the connection, the sense of belonging that happens within that, and that's very personal, I guess. And I guess on a personal level, that's how we arrange our house. And for us, when we're working with new clients, I guess we look at those things initially, that sort of connection from the front footpath to the front door. That can, I guess, divulge a whole series of someone's personality or idiosyncrasies. Is it a fortress? Is it open? Is it opening to the street? And then, as you enter that front door or side door, then there's another layering and another unpacking of information that we sort of try and record. And I find it fascinating.
Well, thanks so much for your time, and I really appreciate the chat, buddy. Good on you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Great to chat with you.
You've been listening to The Art of Living, a podcast series presented by Brickworks Building Products.